You know.
Oh, no intro song? This is the... That's right. In the Tank Podcast, this is episode 309. As always, I'm your host, Donald Kendall. Today, we're going to be talking about Afghanistan, climate change, maybe a little infrastructure at the tail end. We'll see if we have time for that. Never usually do. Joining me today, I've got Justin Haskins, editorial director here at the Heartland Institute. How are you, good sir?
I'm doing well. I'm doing very well. Please use my full title.
Also joining us,
director, research fellow, director of the Stopping Socialism, whatever we're calling it, editor-in-chief of StoppingSocialism.com. We could go on, I guess, but we could stop there for now.
Yeah, take a guess at what that D on his hat stands for. Also joining us, we have Jim Lakely, VP of the Heartland Institute. How are you, good sir?
I'm doing all right, I guess. I've spent combined 5 total hours on hold with StubHub over the last 3 days, trying to get my concert tickets, which they did not send to me like they're supposed to, and listening to that hold music for hours on end for 3 straight days is a form of torture. So that's
actually the concert.
You
didn't know that?
You're right. Actually, I'll probably spend 2 more hours on the phone with StubHub than I will at the actual concert. So.
Well, this is awkward because our sponsor for today is StubHub. Join StubHub today.
I got some words for our sponsor then. Yeah.
Chris Talgo also joining us, senior editor at the Heartland Institute. How are you, good sir?
Doing good. And Jim, I think that the concert was canceled due to Governor Pritzker's latest COVID orders. So you will hear the concert on your phone, as Justin said.
Yeah, it's all going to be done via Zoom. So
yeah.
You don't need tickets. You just have to get the link, You could sit in your house right there.
Virtual concert.
Yeah, come into a living room near you. Gentlemen, from my vantage point, it seems like it's been another terrible week for the Biden administration. He's continuing to take flack from all sides with this dumpster.
Wait a minute. You think it's a bad week for the Biden administration?
Was a good week.
This is a great week for the... Oh, wait, you said Biden. I thought you meant Taliban. Sorry.
Right. I get those mixed up. Yeah.
Same thing.
Polls show that Biden's approval ratings are down double-digit points. I saw one poll showing that he dropped from like 53% before all of this stuff hit the fan down to 41% in just 2 weeks. Pretty huge drop.
41% approve?
Yeah.
Who are these people? Are they the Taliban? Is that who we're polling? Is it 41% of people in the Taliban? Who is supporting this guy at this point?
100% of the people in the Taliban support this president.
These are all lagging, indicators, right? So give it a couple more weeks, and maybe it'll drop a few more points. But
I hope so.
It's like 41% said, well, he's not Trump, so he's good.
Yeah.
You know how that works. Chris, I consider you my mainstream media correspondent. You watch the news, so I don't have to. So how is the news cycle handling this story as it reaches week 2 of of its infancy here?
Well, I do want to say that things took a turn for the worse this morning. So we know that there were 2 bomb blasts outside the gates of Kabul. And unfortunately, a bunch of Americans were injured, and apparently news reports are that 4 Marines were killed. So I think that this will likely change how the media is portraying it. But up to this point, after the initial chaos, I think the media was really coming down hard on him. But then they kind of did shift in their tone to say, well, the airlift is going super well, and all these Americans are getting out, and there's only 1,500 Americans left. And
that's it.
Yeah, and Anthony Blinken, came on yesterday and said that all 1,500 of those have told us that they actually want to stay. So, I don't believe anything that comes out of their mouths because they are contradicting each other literally minutes after one of them gives a press conference. But in terms of the media, I think that the media is going to have to pivot back to Afghanistan is, like just the biggest debacle maybe in American foreign policy history.
So just real quick, I wasn't on last week, so I didn't get to say how absolutely horrific this whole thing is, and what a joke Joe Biden is, and how tragic this whole situation is. But I did want to ask Jim a question. Jim, has there ever been a time that you can remember where a situation more embarrassing than this happened with any other president in your memory? I mean, not in my memory.
Right. Since the 1950s, has
Well, I was thinking like 1930s, but since you can remember. I mean, seriously, I cannot remember a single time. Now, granted, I'm not super old, so I can't remember that many presidents, but I remember a lot of embarrassing things happening with Obama. I thought the rise of ISIS and everything was a total catastrophe. But the way that happened was just not as dramatic as this. And this is just, it was so predictable and so embarrassing. I mean, seriously, can you think of a single time where, because I know Donnie's answer, the answer is no, and I know Chris's answer, the answer is no. So is there a time prior to, say, George W. Bush that anything like this ever happened? I mean, people talked about Saigon, I know, but I mean, anything like that? Because I can't think of anything. This is literally the most embarrassing thing for this country and the most tragic thing. We're supposedly not going to leave anybody behind, but here we are leaving people behind and allowing people to get murdered in the streets by
Justin's giving you plenty of time to think, Jim. What?
Well, that's how you do it. That's how the pros do it. You ask a question long enough so that they have time to come up with an answer.
You come up with anything, Jim?
Yeah, well, when I was a young man in the Harding administration, the teapot dome scandal was a pretty big deal. But in more serious terms, I mean, the answer is no. They've compared it, as you said, Justin, to the fall of Saigon. People blamed Richard Nixon for it. Gerald Ford was actually president when that famous iconic photograph of people trying to clamber onto a helicopter leaving our embassy in Saigon. People have also brought up Ronald Reagan was president when our barracks was bombed in Lebanon, and 200 plus Marines were killed in that incident, and that was considered, it's more than an embarrassment. It was a tragedy, and it was a foreign policy failure for not protecting the perimeter well enough, not taking the threats to our presence in the Middle East more seriously. But there has been nothing in American history like this that in the 20th century and the 21st century. This is a foreign policy disaster that is completely unprecedented. And the thing that's tragic and horrible about it is that it was preventable. Yes, I think everybody on this podcast and most people listening would probably agree that 20 years in Afghanistan is long enough. 20 years is long enough to try to train up the Afghan National Army to be able to protect itself and its government. And you can, and as we said last week when you weren't here, Justin, Joe Biden by choice has done this completely backwards, and that's what's led to this tragedy. You don't leave. The last people to leave is your military, like it was in Vietnam, in Saigon. That was a military chopper that left. And that was our last presence there officially in Vietnam. Joe Biden bugged out of Bagram, literally in the middle of the night, did not tell our allies this was happening. There are, while Americans are there, people forget that Afghanistan from the beginning has been a NATO operation. I just saw a picture this morning of Norwegian troops helping at the front gate to instead of the Bagram Air Force Base, which we should have kept in operation until we were out and all of our civilians were out, at the Kabul International Airport, where there's only one runway, but there were Norwegian troops there helping American troops. And to not even tell our allies that we are bugging out, to do it in the middle of the night and leave all the equipment there for the intent was like, well, we'll leave this for the Afghan National Army. Well, they surrendered immediately, so all of that stuff is in the hands of the Taliban. They have literally tens of thousands of armored vehicles, tens of thousands of missiles and rocket-propelled grenades, millions of rounds of ammunition, and a bunch of our rifles. And to have the Taliban be on Twitter, Donald Trump can't be on there, but the Taliban can be on Twitter and trolling Joe Biden and the United States by recreating the raising of the flag on Iwo Jima with their own flag on top of a mountain in Afghanistan. This is a level of humiliation and disaster and tragedy that we have never seen in American history, and God bless, we would never see again.
Yeah, and just one quick thing to add to that. Donnie and I have the honor to know Glenn Beck, a great guy. He's got a fantastic charity called the Nazarene Fund that is actively trying to rescue thousands of people in Afghanistan as we speak, trying to escape. He actually went to the Middle East, I think yesterday or the day before. He's there now. I don't know if Donnie knows that.
I did not.
He's in the Middle East now, actively trying to get these people out. And he has repeatedly, he did a show last night about this, said that everything you're hearing from the Biden administration is just a flat out lie. There are thousands, not 1,000, not 1,500, thousands of people, thousands of Americans trying to get into the airport. The State Department has now has turned people away. They've taken over the Kabul airport. They're running the show. They're not the Defense Department. And they're turning people away. They're not allowing people who have already flown out. They actually have planes who are being full of refugees being turned around and being forced to go to other places because the State Department refuses to give the diplomatic approvals that are necessary from some of these host countries. What is happening is completely shameful, and I really don't think that anyone who's watching this, who's been following this story, should believe anything that they're hearing from the Biden administration at this point, because they are not only incompetent, we know that, that's not even a question, they are liars when it comes to this issue, because this is a massive, massive, massive scandal, bigger than it's going to be, I think. Bigger than Benghazi, bigger than what happened with ISIS. I think it's going to be worse than all of that by the time it's all said and done. And I think, unfortunately, the tragedies are just getting started, and it's going to get a lot worse.
You know what? Another thing that just really irks me is that Joe Biden is not taking any questions on this, and the few times that he's even responding to journalists, he's joking with them. He's making light of this. I mean, where's Joe Biden, in terms of his leadership in all of this? He's gone.
America is back, baby. America is back.
Yeah, or Joe Biden's back, because that's what you see at these press conferences.
Exactly right.
He's walking away from questions. Boom! Joke of the podcast, everyone. That'll do it for today. We're gonna go ahead, Jim. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Well, he said at one of the press conferences. Don't call them press conferences. One of the don't even call it a media availability, which is another term for that. At one of his
propaganda
teleprompter readings in a prestigious room in the White House. At one of those, he talked about how he was on the phone with his. We're coordinating with our G7 leaders in NATO to make sure this is all handled the right way. He was on the phone with them for literally 7 minutes. And why do we know that? Not because the White House told how long Joe Biden was on the phone with our allies in Afghanistan, but because Boris Johnson just mentioned it. On his own, because he was on that phone call. 7 minutes. 7.
And that was 36 hours after the fact.
Right. And he didn't talk to them for 48 hours, or at least.
Well, in fairness to
him, this is a debacle. And people are asking, was this on purpose or is this incompetence? And the fact that both options are equally viable, that's also scary.
Look, in fairness, 7 minutes is probably 5 minutes than he normally is capable of staying awake without, having to go to nap time. So that's pretty good for him. You gotta hand it to him.
Joe Biden curve.
Yeah, it's right. You gotta grade everything on the Joe Biden curve. And I don't know if we can say that a person who has dementia is capable really of making any sort of rational decision about anything. And as far as I can tell, I mean, look, we don't know the whole story, but I think we're going to find out the whole story at some point, or at least much of it, because the people who are ultimately going to be partially blamed for this, they're already being partially blamed for this, and who are going to want to speak out and get the real story out there, is the people who are in the intelligence community, Department of Defense, the Joint Chiefs, the people who are in the military, who are being thrown under the bus because they supposedly thought this was all fine. Some of those people, I am very sure, said, you know what? Probably not a good idea to take the military out before we take the civilians out. That's probably not a very smart thing. You don't need to be a military genius to know that the civilians should come first and that you shouldn't leave a bunch of weapons behind for the Taliban to steal. This is common sense. And so I am sure we are going to find out that there are many, many, many people who told Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and other people making the decisions at the top, this was not a good idea, this was not the right time to do this, and they did it anyway. I think that's the story. I think we're going to find that out eventually. And again, this is going to be a massive scandal. Massive. It's only going to get worse as time goes on. And it's incredibly, incredibly tragic and disheartening. But this is, look, elections have consequences. So when you vote for somebody who has been calling for these kinds of policies for a really long time, is wildly irresponsible, is kind of a moron, and everybody knew it, then this is the kind of stuff that you're going to end up with. So,
yeah, well, and the policy choices also have consequences in the elections. So it's all cyclical. We'll see what happens, come the midterms. I had this conversation yesterday with a couple of people, but I'm still like confounded by why he's taking so much flack and why there isn't like a circling of the wagons to kind of prop up like the left when it comes to all these decision makings and try to cast all the blame onto Trump and all of that. You see that a little bit, but still not the level that I would have expected to see. But I don't know. We'll see what happens in the coming weeks. I mentioned last week that I found it humorous and a bit revealing that this story completely supplanted the then recent release of the UN IPCC climate assessment report. Well, this hasn't stopped climate alarmists from continuing to sound the alarm, and in the most pathetic way possible. So I don't know about you, but my Google curated news feed that pops up on my phone if I scroll to the left has shown me multiple stories that try to lay the blame on, of the ongoing Afghanistan debacle, not on Biden, not on the Afghan government, not on the Afghan military, not even on Trump, but on climate change. Yeah, that's right. It was climate change that's who's to blame for all this stuff going on in Afghanistan. I think climate change is what set off those bombs near the airport, but I'm not sure. That's just speculation on my part. So the first story that I have in regards to this is from CBS News, how climate change helped strengthen the Taliban. So the article starts off saying rural Afghanistan has been rocked by climate change. The past 3 decades have brought floods and drought that have destroyed crops and left people hungry. And the Taliban, likely without knowing climate change was the cause, has taken advantage of the pain. Whether from drought or flood-ravaged soil, farmers in the region struggle to maintain productive crops and livestock. When they cannot profitably farm, they're forced to borrow funds to survive. When Afghans can't pay off lenders, the Taliban often steps in to sow government resentment. Quote, if you've lost your crop and land, or the Afghan government hasn't paid enough attention to you, then of course the Taliban can come and exploit it, says Kamal Alam, a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantics Council South Asia Center. The article goes on to blame terrorism worldwide on climate change, from the Boko Haram in Africa to ISIS in Iraq and Syria. I could see it now, Justin. You support terrorism by not wanting our country to be run off of windmills and solar panels. Yeah. How do you respond to that, you terrorist?
I'm still trying to figure out how climate change can be causing both droughts and floods in this region. I don't understand that. How could there be floods? Also, isn't this the desert?
I was wondering about that too.
I mean, aren't they used to droughts? I don't know. Is this really like the agricultural center of the universe? I don't think so. That's not particularly known for having these gigantic cash crops or something like that. Also, how do they explain the Taliban and, I don't know, lots of different groups like the Taliban that have existed for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years in the Middle East?
There was no such thing as droughts and floods back then, apparently.
Oh, that's right. You're right. They've never had a flood in the Middle East, I guess. Is this? Yeah, I mean, this is just totally ludicrous. Once again, they can't let a single thing happen without it somehow being it's almost like a mental disorder. It's like we need some kind of a psychiatric team to study these people and figure out why they see climate change everywhere. You know how they have those ink blot things and they show them and it's like you look at the ink blot and it's like, oh my God, that's my dad like killing my mom or something. And it's supposed to tell you something about how you see the world. It's like that, except everything that they see is climate change.
Right.
It doesn't matter what the ink blood is. Everything is climate change. Everything, everywhere, all the time. If there are hurricanes, it's climate change. If there's droughts, it's climate change. Flooding, climate change. Taliban, climate change. Everything is climate change all the time.
Joe Biden falling in the polls, climate change.
Yeah, everything's climate change. I mean, can we look? Conservatives need to find something like this. Because this is just too easy. We need something just like this. It can't be climate change, that one's taken. We need something else. But we need to find something where no matter what happens, we just say, oh, there it is. It's that. But if only the left just believe, like maybe we should just pick taxes or something. Oh, Taliban, taxes. That's what it was. It was taxes.
We do have something like that. Taxes. We do have something like that. It's government intervention. Why is healthcare so screwed up? Government intervention. Why is college costs up so much? Government intervention. But that one's real.
So, yeah, that one's real, and it's not quite as catchy and flashy.
It doesn't have the emotional tug on the heartstrings.
Right. Yeah, we need.
You can't put a picture of a polar bear, then a picture of a government bureaucrat, and have.
We could. Yeah. We could just put like J.B. Pritzker.
Yes.
Kind of looks like a polar bear.
Yeah, that's a good point. That'll really convince people to feel sympathetic for us. Show that fat. All right, look here's the thing. Okay, we need. We need a picture of a polar bear with J.B. Pritzker's head
side by side.
Pull on top of it. Can we do that?
Put him on an iceberg and stick him in the Arctic, please. Yeah, that's where get him out of Illinois.
Yeah, that's where he needs to go. It's just you get my point though, right? I mean, like it's just nonstop all the time. It never ends. It's both ridiculous and at the same time pathetic that they don't even have something else. Like they just there's no even creativity in their lying anymore. It's just go straight to climate change for everything.
Yeah. Well, maybe I'm too jaded. Maybe Justin and I are too jaded from like the constant climate change rhetoric that we're immersed in on a weekly basis. Chris, do you think that we're being too hard on this article? Did you read through this?
Not at all. I think you guys are going too easy on it. I mean, first of all, I totally agree with Justin. It is so intellectually lazy to just blame everything on climate change because they've been doing it for so many years. It's jumped the shark. It's done. It's over with. We talked about Afghanistan at the beginning, and it's a very serious topic, and there's people dying, and it's a humiliation. Of the American military under, Joe Biden's, as commander in chief. However, to try to take something as serious as that, and then just, throw climate change into the mix, it's just so frustrating. It's so dishonorable.
Right.
They know better than that. Just like they did with COVID. They tried to blame COVID on climate change. Like, give us a break. We're not stupid. We know that they blame climate change on everything. Just enough already.
Well, you know what? Some people are stupid.
Well,
and that's why they keep doing it, because some people are stupid enough to actually buy into this stuff.
The thing that I hate like most about this type of article is just the insinuation that if we only embraced unreliable energy like windmills and solar panels, then terrorism wouldn't happen. Right. And like, if that is the insinuation, which I don't doubt that it isn't, then like that's not a helpful perspective on this matter, like at all.
Actually, what Chris said, it's more than that though. It is offensive. It's actually like an offensive thing to do. Mm-hmm. It is more than just stupid and wrong and ridiculous and whatever. It's like you are dishonoring what is happening here by trying to politicize a topic has nothing to do with what's going on, and you're like, oh no, don't pay attention to the absurd policies of the Biden administration and the reckless policies of the Biden administration. This is happening right now. It's not like we're reflecting on something that happened a year ago.
Right.
They're talking about this is as it's happening, and they're like, no. Look at this shiny object over here instead. Don't worry about what's happening with Joe Biden. Like, forget about all that. You know who's really to blame? Those damn fossil fuel companies. They're the ones that did this. And it's like, come on. It is so offensive to try, not just to our intelligence and just in general, to anybody with even slight bit of common sense. But it's offensive because these people are dying in the streets right now as we speak because of the Biden administration's failures, and these people are trying to distract us with something that has literally nothing to do with it by blaming it on that in some way. It's absurd.
As Steve Malloy said when he was on the podcast, a couple of weeks ago, like there are no climate-related deaths. There's weather-related deaths, and like the imperfect weather conditions that the farmers are having to deal with in Afghanistan doesn't have to be framed under this like climate change scope. It's bad weather. And once you acknowledge that, the issue becomes less about fake, ineffective solutions to help those, in need. And it could turn to real solutions to help those that are in need.
That's a great point.
Erecting windmills in Minnesota is going to do nothing to help the farmers that are suffering in Afghanistan. But perhaps feet on the ground humanitarian work will. I wouldn't suggest doing that at the moment. Let stuff calm down a little bit first. But seriously, like, what is the point of trying to like equate all of this to climate change? It's not helping anybody. It's not helping anybody. It's just silly.
It's a distraction.
It's helping line the pockets of Democratic donors.
Well, that too.
Yeah, I mean, it's a distraction. The way Justin just talked about it. I mean, there are people dying in the streets right now. There are people who died this morning. As I said on the podcast last week, as bad as you think it is, and as bad as it is at the moment I'm speaking, it'll be worse tomorrow, and it'll be worse the day after that, and it will continue to get worse. That's just the nature of these things, and that's borne out over the last 7 days. But if you go to climaterealism.com, actually, James Taylor, our president here at the Heartland Institute, wrote an article, talking about climate change and Afghanistan. And you guys were specifically talking about farmers and crops and food production. Food production is actually up and is up dramatically in Afghanistan over the last several years. So just even the premise that climate change is caused hunger or strife, and that's what led to the Taliban and all that. That's all garbage, just based on data. It's also garbage based on common sense. And it's kind of immoral to say that's the real problem here. And
pull that back up, Andy.
Yeah.
Go back up to the top. So climaterealism.com, you're going to have to actually go to the website, because surely the idea that global warming did not create the Taliban victory is too controversial to be shared on social media. So you're going to actually have to go to this website to read this article, I'm sure.
Yeah.
We don't want our account being banned by insinuating that climate change didn't create the Taliban victory,
And by the way, how is that opium crop going in Afghanistan this year? I'm sure they're making lots of money off that.
Yeah, the other thing that is so frustrating about this particular side of this is that the argument is that there's all these crop failures, and the crop failures and all the issues that have forced these people to turn to the Taliban, ignoring, of course, the fact that these people had turned to groups like the Taliban way before we had global warming or whatever. But putting all that aside, shouldn't all of this, let's just say that was true and that there were crop failures. What about the billions and billions and billions of dollars of aid that the United States has been pumping into this country for 20 years? Shouldn't that have offset, the little amount of warming that has gone on and affected some farmers' crops somewhere? I mean, I don't get it. Am I supposed to believe that the direct aid that the United States has been providing this country for 20 years is less effective than building extra windmills in Kansas? That's what I'm supposed to believe? That if only we had built more windmills in Kansas, none of this would have happened?
Right.
But the billions of dollars that we actually gave to this whole country and helped develop their technology and build up their military and form their government and save them from the Taliban in the first, none of that can't be outweighed by the tiny little bit of warming that's happened over the past 20 years. It's just a stupid argument on its face.
Here's an idea. Maybe climate change is focused on, instead of what's actually going on the ground in Afghanistan or the fight against terrorism and extremism worldwide, because climate change allows governments to control their people. They're innocent citizens that live in their countries, whereas the war on terror doesn't. The war on terror is external. Controlling your behavior to save the planet because of you are causing climate change is a catch-all, and has been for decades, a catch-all excuse to control you. It's not about controlling energy, it's about controlling energy, of course, and changing the energy grid and all that stuff. But ultimately, it's about controlling you. It all comes down to you. You are a problem. You having the ability and the ability to get cheap energy, the ability to raise your standard of living, all those things are a problem to the command and control global unit, global network that wishes really to dominate.
Well, the good news is, I think now that the Taliban is in charge of Afghanistan, I'm willing to bet the CO2 emissions go down for Afghanistan. I think that they're probably going to
Me
go
too.
down now, because everyone's going to be a sheep farmer and live under Sharia law. So we should be good to go. I don't think you have to worry about any more industrialization and modern commercialization and things like that. It's not a problem anymore. So that's good.
Right, no doubt. I've got another article here. This one's from Forbes titled U.S. Climate Agenda in the Aftermath of the Afghanistan Withdrawal. So it's one of the first opening articles starts off saying, could American unilateralism on Afghanistan affect Biden's climate agenda? One may be tempted to say no, because climate change in Afghanistan are unrelated issues, which I just find so funny because it completely contradicts the last article that we read through. But whatever. Anyways, the story continues about the potential policy implications Afghanistan will have. It says, however, the domestic climate agenda could be a different story, and Afghanistan continues to swamp the U.S. news cycle with the dominant narrative of a policy failure. The withdrawal will, at a minimum, crowd out climate change. But the more significant concern is that the Afghanistan fiasco narrative might reduce Biden's ability to push for a muscular federal climate action. He will spend his political capital defending the Afghanistan withdrawal. The author ends the article saying, in sum, Biden needs a coherent response to the withdrawal fiasco. Republicans are already talking about impeachment should they win the House in the 2022 midterm elections. Without managing the Afghanistan narrative, he will lose momentum on domestic climate issues, thereby undermining America's credibility in the global arena as well. So if you read through the article, I disagree with a number of the statements that are made throughout this. But I think the main overarching part is sound. The rest of the Biden agenda, whether it's climate change or infrastructure, is going to suffer because of the ongoing dumpster fire that is the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Jim, what do you think about that?
Well, I think that story is interesting in the fact that they think. Let me just back up. Actually, what I actually find really amazing are the attempts by the Biden administration to move on from Afghanistan as if it's just some kind of temporary blip on their agenda. The other day when Joe Biden came out, again, didn't take any questions, but read from the teleprompter, and then turned his back to the American people and to Afghanistan and to the world and walked off without taking any questions. He spent the first, 5-10 minutes of his remarks talking about the infrastructure bill, how proud he was that Nancy Pelosi and the leadership of the Democratic Party were able to get this $3 trillion infrastructure plan shoved through. And then he went on and talked about another topic. I think it was the next infrastructure bill. Oh, I'm sorry. No, it was about the voting rights bill that they're going to throw into reconciliation to basically federalize our elections in this country, making it very easy to game the system. Let's call it cheating. It's going to be basically called the Election Cheating Act of 2021. And he talked about those two things. And then, now on to Afghanistan. So imagine being somebody's an American, and there are thousands and thousands and thousands of Americans who are going to be trapped and be captured by the Taliban, and you're third on President Puddinghead's agenda when he comes out to talk to the American people, and all they care about is Afghanistan.
Right.
So they did that on purpose. That was written into the teleprompter for him because the Biden administration actually believes that they can make Afghanistan go away. They thought maybe about a week. It'll be a week-long story. Guess what? The withdrawal from Afghanistan deadline is August 31st. So they're probably thinking in the White House right now, if we can just get to past Labor Day, all this will be behind us, and we can go back to our agenda. We can go to the Green New Deal agenda. We can talk and tout this infrastructure bill. We can do all of these things. And it's the same thing with their climate agenda. They think that they can put this behind them and move forward with climate. And that'll be tenable. That is ridiculous. This Afghanistan story is an unfolding disaster and will continue to get worse. And do you think that the world community, the G7 nations, that we're supposed to be joining arms, locked in arms to save the planet from climate change, are going to be very interested in working with the United States after this debacle, after leaving our allies high and dry? In Afghanistan, there will be Brits and Norwegians and French and other Western European citizens stranded in Afghanistan entirely because of the way the Biden administration botched this whole thing. So, I think the climate agenda is dead. I hope the climate agenda is dead because there are a lot more important things to think about and do.
Well, Justin, I mean, you and I, when we talk about like the Great Reset, right? Like the climate change is a very crucial justification for all of these things that, either the left or the global elite have, all of these agendas that they have in motion. So if climate change is going to, that agenda, if climate change is going to take like a whacking, or at least, be prioritized down a little bit, like, what does that say about all this other stuff that they got in motion? What do you think?
Well, I actually think that in the short term, I think it's not going to go away. But I think that give it a few weeks, it probably will go away. And the reason why is not because the story is should go away. It's not because the problems are going to go away. It's because the media will, because the media always does this. The media will at some point realize, okay, we can't talk about this anymore. We have to stop. We have to. We know it's still a news story. We know it's still a problem. We covered it for a couple weeks. We got to stop because this doesn't help us. This does not help our side. If we keep harping on this, it's going to hurt Joe Biden. We need Joe Biden to be successful to get our agenda, and they'll move on to something else. There will be something else, and climate change might be that something.
But isn't the damage already done? Like the one of the big bullets in the chamber for them was that upcoming UN IPCC climate report that came out a couple of weeks ago. And now that's completely a wasted bullet. Like it's completely out of the news cycle, If
I've learned anything over the past couple of years, it's that they can make up a story whenever they want and make it important whenever they feel like it. They can create a crisis whenever they want. So it doesn't have to be based on science. It doesn't have to be based on something in the news cycle. Yeah, sure, it would have been nice if the IPCC thing had coordinated. I'm sure they planned on coordinating these two things, and it didn't really work out. Sometimes that happens. I'm sure they will find a way to make this a big topic. And something else, because this is the thing. There's never going to stop being weather events. And that's all they need. Some weather event, a hurricane, a big snowstorm, it could be anything. And then all of a sudden it's like, you know what? It's that damn climate change. We got to do something about it. And then that becomes the primary story. And as long as all of them are talking about it all at the same time, running stories all at the same time, talking about this with the same talking points, they will get a lot of people on board, at least to some extent, with thinking about this. Because that's what they did with all... Do we have to go over the police shootings thing again? I mean, they think about that. They talked about that with such veracity. I mean, with such velocity and with so much intensity that they got tens of thousands of people to go protest in the streets and burn down police stations and take over whole city blocks because about 18 people a year are fatally shot by police, African Americans. And a lot of those people probably deserved it. Not all of them, but a lot of them probably did. So they were able to get cities half burned down and looted over something like that. So if they really try, they can make something a major topic, a major issue. And I think it's just a matter of time before the climate change thing comes back around. It won't be this week. It won't be next week. Probably won't be the week after that. Give it a month or two. The media will find a way to make this topic. It's too important for them to prioritize this. They can't give up on it this easily. They have to make this a topic of priority.
So I'm going to come to you, Chris, next, but I want to bring up this other article, Breitbart. Taliban vows to help fight climate change. So a Taliban representative told Newsweek in an interview Monday that the jihadist organization will, if permitted, play an indispensable role on the international stage in fighting climate change, among other supposed global challenges. So, people, do you feel reassured now? Once the Taliban has finished taking over the country, reinstituting Sharia law, making women second-class citizens, then they're going to turn their attention to solving climate change, probably ending child hunger, and hey, maybe they'll get into the space race. Who knows? Chris, does anyone take this seriously, or is this like actually a thing that people are like, happy about?
Of course, nobody takes this seriously.
Thank God.
And we all know that the Taliban could not care less about climate change. They have their agenda, which is to cement power over their country, while allowing terrorist groups in so that they can plan future attacks on America. But I just want to go back to one thing that Justin was saying. I 1000% agree that the media has the ability to just make stories disappear in like the blink of an eye. And look at what they've done by not reporting on what's going on at the border. So not only can they make a story just quickly disappear, but they can also prevent a story that's been taking place for months, in which literally millions of people are just walking into this country, and they can just pretend like it's not happening. So I agree. Of course they'll pivot. They know that the midterm elections are kind of like on the horizon, and they're not going to make Joe Biden and company look this terrible, to the American people for this long. It's like they couldn't help but report on this, for the time being. But like Justin also said, August 31st, this deadline's going to be up. The American people are going to move, onto different issues. School's going to be back in session, COVID, the Delta variant, all that kind of stuff. So I highly think that they will just pivot away from Afghanistan, pretend like nothing ever happened. Remember, the Taliban will be in power, so the journalists will not be able to go and openly report what's going on there, and we'll just move on. Just like with Cuba. Remember the whole Cuban independence thing? How that was dominating the news for a couple of weeks. I haven't heard anybody say one thing about that in weeks.
Yeah,
so
that's a good point.
It's just the way it is. It's the American people have a very short attention span, and Justin, I 100% agree. They will go back to their protect Joe Biden and company at all costs.
I'm just surprised. I've always, like I said, since the beginning of this, I've always been surprised that they haven't just like from day one, just being in protect mode with him. I'm open to theories, people. Everyone in the comments, explain to me why. I'm just shocked why like the media is, even on the left, the CNNs, the Don Lemons, the Rachel Maddows are actually like, throwing flack at Joe Biden. Explain that to me. I'm surprised by it. And then as for what you were saying about like, the Cuba thing, the biggest example for me was back in 2009 when like Iran was having all of those like protests and like it was independence, all of this stuff. And then overnight they stopped talking about it because Michael Jackson died. And I get it. That's newsworthy. That's nationwide. That's worldwide news for sure. But like, it's seriously, his death stopped that protest stuff in Iran literally overnight. So,
I also just real quick, I think that made the Obama administration look bad. So that, of course, they also wanted to pivot away from that.
Sure. So the not referenced in this story about the Taliban helping to fight climate change is the fact that Afghanistan is home to $1 trillion+ worth of rare earth material, including lithium. Perhaps this is the way that the Taliban plans to help aid the global fight against climate change. We all know that lithium is a crucial ingredient in batteries, and we're going to need a ton of those if we're going to switch to, if we are forced to switch to unreliable energy like wind and solar, we're going to need a whole lot of batteries. But guess who's got their eye on those lithium deposits? Not Joe Biden, China. That's right. So I've got this other article here that is, as U.S. exits Afghanistan, China eyes $1 trillion in minerals. It says Afghanistan is sitting on deposits estimated to be worth $1 trillion or more, including what may be the world's largest lithium reserves, if anyone can get them out of the ground. Quote, with the U.S. withdrawal, Beijing can offer what Kabul needs most, political impartiality and economic investment, Zhao Bu, who was a senior colonel in the People's Liberation Army from 2003 to 2020, wrote in an op-ed in the New York Times over the weekend, quote, Afghanistan, in turn, has what China most prizes, opportunities in infrastructure and industry building, areas in which China's capabilities are arguably unmatched, and access to $1 trillion in untapped mineral deposits. Officials and state-run media have softened the ground for good relations, with the Communist Party-backed Global Times reporting that Chinese investment is likely to be widely accepted in Afghanistan. Another report argued the, quote, the U.S. is in no position to meddle with any potential cooperation between China and Afghanistan, including on rare earths. So, Jim, there was one thing that I always liked kind of talking about during the Trump era, which was like this seemingly impossible feat of reaching energy independence. They've been talking about wanting to do that ever since I was born, basically. And then it happened under Trump. It's not happening anymore. But we've gone in just a couple of years from, energy independence to now we're going to be dependent on the rare earth minerals, materials like lithium and all of that are going to be monopolized by China. Pretty crazy. Just a couple of years, Jim.
Yeah, very crazy. This reminds me, we talked about this at the office the other day, Donnie, obviously before this podcast, that, I'm old enough to remember when we went into the Gulf, the first Gulf War in the early 90s. And then, of course, after 9/11, we went into Iraq, and there were all these people on the streets saying, no blood for oil, no blood for oil. We didn't take a damn drop out of either Kuwait or Iraq, despite all the money and lives that it cost us in those wars. We're the only imperial invading army that doesn't take anything. And in fact, when we're done invading your country, unless it's bungled to the extent that Iraq and Afghanistan have been, we end up leaving the place better than it was as far as infrastructure than when we got there. And so, we would probably have been energy independent for the last 20 or 30 years if we actually took the oil out of Iraq and Kuwait and took it home with us. But we didn't do that. And I find it amazing, absolutely gobsmackingly amazing, that only now, right now, is the first time most Americans have ever heard the fact that Afghanistan, which has been described as a complete wasteland with nothing of value to take out of there, for 20 years, we've been told that Afghanistan is just a complete wasteland, that there's nothing of value there, and that's one of the reasons why it's always such a hellhole. It has the largest lithium deposit on Earth.
Yeah.
We learned about this last week.
Okay.
And again, why the heck didn't we take it?
Okay.
If we would have developed those, maybe the Afghanistan government would have been a little stronger if the United States, after taking over that country, had developed the mineral deposits in that country to enrich and strengthen our allied government in Afghanistan. Maybe none of this would have been happening if we had done that in the beginning. And only now are we even learning this is happening. And we're only learning about it because now, after doing all of this work, all of this sacrifice for 20 years, we leave and China's just going to walk in and take all the lithium. This is unbelievable. And so the layers of disaster that this entire thing is just going to keep getting worse as we go forward. This is unbelievable.
Well, okay, thank you for bringing that up, because I thought maybe I just wasn't aware that this was just like a commonly held knowledge that Afghanistan was home to all of these, trillions of dollars of deposits in the world's largest lithium thing. Like, I never heard about that. I just thought it was me, but you,
No, this was never talked about.
Right.
Never.
Yeah, I think it's important to kind of circle back to this idea of energy independence, and that was such a huge topic in this country for decades. I mean, decades. For half a century, that was something we all talked about constantly.
Yeah. Was
energy independence. Why? Because everybody understands that if you can control energy, you can control the economy, right? And you can control people's. It's a defense issue as well. It's a national security issue. And what we're doing, effectively, by moving towards these, a greater reliance on windmills and solar panels, which depend on these rare earth minerals, which are controlled by China.
Right.
I mean, the vast majority of the rare earth minerals are developed in China. And now the Taliban too. So these are the people we're going to depend on. So instead of having, fracking in South Dakota, we're going to be reliant on the Taliban and the Chinese Communist Party. That's the plan.
Right.
I mean, this is one of the dumbest policy decisions you could possibly make. And there's no way this works out well for us. If we actually become dependent on these rare earth minerals, we are totally screwed if China decides to wake up one day and say, you know what? We're going to double the cost of all of these rare earth minerals to you, America, because we don't really like you anymore.
Yeah, this is the most important part of this conversation that we're having. The idea that like the left is going to blame all of this stuff on climate change. Ha ha ha. Yeah, we have some laughs about that. The idea that Biden's agenda is being undermined because of all of this. The political ramifications of that are pretty important. Sure. The Taliban coming out saying that we're going to fight climate change again. We have a good laugh about that. This is the most important thing. if it is true that we are going to be dependent on, like you said, the Taliban and the Communist Party of China for our energy production and all of this, like that is setting us up for absolute disaster. I got this.
Just real quick, look at what China did during the beginning of the COVID crisis when they held all the PPE and then sold it for double, triple, quadruple the price. So if they're going to do that when a pandemic is in its infancy,
right?
How are they going to treat us when we rely upon them for, like you guys were saying, for the rare earth minerals or for like whatever else we need?
Yeah, no doubt at all.
This is what's so infuriating about all of this. It's like I need to go on another trademark Jim rant. But it's, the Paris Climate Agreement exempted China and India, but let's just focus on China from right now, for any reduction in their CO2 emissions until 2030, or maybe it was 2050. It doesn't matter what it was, because China was not going to adhere to that goal anyway. But here we are, the developed economies of the West are forcing themselves, I should say the ruling class of these Western powers are imposing artificial restrictions on their economies and on their energy systems through so-called renewable energy, which is going to be highly dependent on batteries. And China, which is building a new coal plant every week. And in fact, I think Steve Malloy on our podcast last week pointed out that China builds in a month more coal capacity than what the entire European Union relies on now.
Wow.
And so they are going to continue to build coal plants, and they're going to produce the batteries and the solar panels and the wind turbines for the foolish governments in the West to power their economies much weaker. So we're going to be dependent on China for our so-called green energy, and the planet is not going to get any better, any cleaner. CO2 emissions are not going to go down because China is going to continue going up. Right. This is absolute insanity. It doesn't make any sense unless you are intending to weaken the West as some sort of punishment because you feel like the West needs to be punished. Well, most of the people living in the West don't agree.
Well, all of this stuff has been in motion for a while. So the last article that I'll bring up regarding all of this topic, then I'll let Justin jump in, is from the Council on Foreign Relations, and it is titled "Why Major Belt and Road Investments Are Not Coming to Afghanistan." So don't trust anything the Council on Foreign Relations ever says. So just like whatever their headlines are, just take it as the opposite as the truth. So the Belt and Road Initiative, Justin, you could probably do a better job of explaining this, but this is like China's plan to build alliances and build infrastructure throughout Asia and Africa. And it's under the guise of like almost a humanitarian, like joint effort type of a thing. But in reality, it's just like harvest, valuables and rare earth material out of all of these countries and all of this. So the article says, the majority of the article is basically that the idea that Afghanistan is far too unstable for China to really invest in. The author of the article references multiple terrorist attacks that have happened in Chinese interests that are likely stemmed from cells in Afghanistan. However, there's a lot of information in this article that makes it seem like, no, the investment stuff is very possible. So there's this paragraph that says Chinese officials have repeatedly expressed interest in expanding Belt and Road Initiative signature undertakings, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, into Afghanistan. CPEC encompasses $62 billion in commitments covering everything from power plants to railways, roads, and major port facilities. In June, China's state councilor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi voiced support for extending CPEC to Afghanistan. During this meeting between foreign ministers from Afghanistan, China, and Pakistan, the three countries agreed to, quote, deepen high-quality Belt and Road cooperation and enhance connectivity between the three countries. Senior members of the Taliban have reciprocated this interest, recently wishing that China, quote, play a bigger role in the future reconstruction and economic development and guaranteeing the safety of Chinese investors and workers in the country. So it theorizes that China may be betting that the prospect of new Belt and Road Initiative projects in Afghanistan will incentivize the Taliban to not provide a sanctuary for like the different terrorist cells that are a concern to China. So it seems like this stuff has been in motion for a couple of years now, and will continue to be in motion. And the idea that they have got trillions of dollars, the world's largest lithium deposits in Afghanistan, is not a coincidence.
Yeah, let me explain why I think it is 99.99% certain that China will be making major Belt and Road Initiative investments in China. I mean, in Afghanistan. It's really simple, actually. If you're the Taliban and you're Afghanistan, and you want to ensure that you have maintain your position in power, and you have had nothing over the past many decades. I mean, going back over a century, but foreign invaders, often bigger, much larger powers fighting in Afghanistan. Russia, you had the Soviet Union, you have the United States there, you had all these different things, right? And you want to solidify yourself. What's the best way to make sure that you can solidify yourself? It's not just getting lots of money and building up your power and infrastructure. It's getting another superpower to have a vested economic interest in your country.
Right.
Because if China has this big base of operations in Afghanistan, no one is ever going to invade Afghanistan.
Right.
It will never happen. So as long as so if I was the Taliban, if I was in their shoes and I wanted to make sure that the United States never comes back ever again, I would give away these rare earth minerals to China. I would give them whatever they want, because all China has to do is be there. And it guarantees no one will ever come mess with you again, because they can't, because no one can afford to go to war with China. So no one will ever go to Afghanistan ever again. So if you know that the Taliban are thinking like this, you know that this is the way, and you know that that's how China is selling it to them behind closed doors. They're saying, look, all we want are these rare earth minerals that you guys can't afford to mine anyway. Right. So we'll give you some money, you'll be richer, and we're going to have this huge presence here, and everyone else is going to leave you alone, because it's like the mafia, right? You give us a little something and we'll provide you with protection, and no one else will bother you. Don't worry about it. That's what's going on here. Yeah. And the other reason I know it's going to happen is because literally right after the Taliban took over Afghanistan, literally right after it happened, the Chinese went out, a representative from the Chinese Communist Party, the government, actually went out and said, we're very interested in working with the Taliban. Literally right after it happened. They didn't even wait for the takeover to be totally complete. They were already sending the very clear signal, public statements to the Taliban saying, hey, we are all for you guys. And they talked about the independence of Afghanistan, and we've always supported the right of the Afghan people to decide their future for themselves, and blah, 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 blah. That's all coded language to the Taliban to say, hey, do business with us, right, and we'll just let you guys do whatever you want. We don't care. And finally, this is the exact arrangement they have all over the world already, with all sorts of other warlords and terrible people in Africa and in other places. They don't care about working with human rights violators, because they are human rights violators. So it doesn't bother them. No. As long as they get their rare earth minerals and the Chinese Communist Party is taken care of, they have no problem building some bases over in Afghanistan or having a bunch of Chinese people there mining or whatever they need to do to make sure no one comes in there. That is inevitable at this point in time, and you can thank Joe Biden for putting us in a position where instead of having a government that's allied with us, we now have a government that's going to be allied with China. So another massive strategic loss for the United States that will go for decades and decades and decades into the future.
And like I said, like this is the most important facet to all of this going on. You know, like, yeah, there's a lot of egg on Joe Biden's face, and there's a lot of terrible stuff that's going on. The humanitarian price that's going to be paid in Afghanistan, absolutely just awful, awful, awful. But this is the big thing that's kind of going on a little bit, there's not a lot of people talking about this, right? This is the big thing that's going on. And if it leads to a dependence, just like that one comment that Andy, you brought up on the screen, if the West has to go begging to China for resources in the future because we need this stuff for solar panels and batteries and all of that, that is an absolute disaster. That is an absolute disaster that will eclipse the stuff that we're seeing in the news about Afghanistan today. Jim, we're running out of time here. I will give you any last words or anything that you want to say about any of these topics we've talked about so far.
I'll just say that what Justin outlined is exactly why I say that this might go down in history as the worst foreign policy debacle of all time in the history of the United States, because it's not just the crisis that's going on right now. I just saw a news alert that 4 Marines were among those killed by that bomb blast at the airport this morning. And those casualties will continue to rise. That is absolutely tragic. We had not had a single casualty, a single death by an American serviceman from February 2020 until now.
Wow.
From this pullout. But the idea that the China getting in bed with Afghanistan, it's such a win-win from both of their perspectives, and it so weakens not just the United States but the entire West, and strengthens. I mean, look, we were able to invade Afghanistan, bomb it from afar, and then invade in the early 2000s because Afghanistan was basically gettable, right? They're not going to be gettable anymore. Not after they've taken all of this hardware, all of this military equipment from the United States. Not after they, as Justin said, have the protection like the mafia of China. They're untouchable now. But all those minerals will go right to China. This is such a disaster. And what we're going to have to see happen is we're going to have to see a repeat of what made the United States an global economic power in the first place, starting in the 19th century. We have to exploit our fossil fuels. The United States became a global superpower because of our immense natural resources in a continental country. That wasn't an accident. That was an accident of, I guess, of us being in North America. But we used those resources to become a global power. If we can, there's no alternative. There's no alternative. Either we're dependent on China for our very economic life, or we do it on our own, which we actually were able to do under the previous president. It shouldn't be too hard to get back to that.
Just real quick, this is just breaking out of Fox. They have, I think you said 4 Marines. Was that what you said, Jim?
I saw alert for that, yeah.
Yeah, they just had a report from Fox that it's 10 service members, U.S. service members killed in these blasts. That's what Fox News is reporting. And apparently there are reports now that that there were people who were inside the gates of the airport before the blast went off, and they sent them back outside the gates, and then the blast went off and a bunch of these people died. So they were actually inside the airport, and then they sent some of them back. Not the service members, these are other people who were fleeing, refugees. So as Jim said earlier, it's not going to get better.
No.
It's going to get worse. And
well, we'll see. We'll see where Joe Biden's approval rating drops next week on the In the Tank podcast. That's going to do it for us this week. We did have a plan to talk about the $3.5 trillion spending plan that passed the House. I'm going to leave the links to that in the show notes if anyone listening to this is interested. One of the links is an Americans for Tax Reform list, tax hikes to expect in the Dems $3.5 trillion plan. There's a whole list of tax hikes. And I was going to make a big point that I think that this is actually the Democrats' response to the inflation that we're seeing. Because if we go under modern monetary theory, what's the best way to curb inflation? Raise taxes. So you could see that in the show notes if you're interested. But we are out of time, so that's going to do it for this week's In the Tank episode. If you like our show, please subscribe, write a review for us on iTunes. It'd be greatly appreciated. For those that are listening to the iTunes or the audio version on a Friday, you can join us on Thursday for the live episode on YouTube or Facebook, and you could put in your comments. We'll respond to them, maybe throw them up on the screen. If you have any comments or suggestions, feel free to email the show at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. Justin, where can the fine people find you?
Justin C. Haskins on Facebook and Socialist Twitter.
Jim Lakely, same question.
At Jay Lakely on Twitter, at Heartland Inst on Twitter, and always find our stuff at heartland.org.
And Chris Talgo, you are a ghost on social media, so just join me in saying goodbye to the fine people.
Bye, everybody. See you next week.